Welcome back to another edition of Force Friday, where we talk about Star Wars theories, characters, concepts, comparisons, analyzations, collectibles, and more. And today we're going to start a new series called Best of the Best, which is where we take one character from the franchise and talk about a handful of the best collectibles, in my opinion, regarding it. Sometimes they won't be necessarily objectively the best. Sometimes they'll be subjectively the best. Or sometimes they'll be important releases, historic releases, whatever the case may be. But I often get asked on my channel, what blank version of blank should I get? And hopefully, as I begin to flesh out this series of videos, I can just forward people directly to a link where they can take a look at some options, and it can be a useful tool for them. And perhaps even save me a little time on the back end, you know what I mean? So with that, today we're going to start with our favorite horned, black-robed Sith Lord, or apprentice, I suppose, Darth Maul. One of the most iconic characters in the series for sure, and I think the fascination with Maul comes from the way he kind of skewed or changed the way that we look at the Sith. I think before that, we just sort of saw them as villains, some that were strong, some that were creepy, but just sort of bad guys that wore dark clothing. Maul made it almost a religious thing. Maul made them seem fanatical, like zealots, completely devoted to an idea or theology. And as a result, he changed the way that we looked at the Sith forever, which is pretty awesome. So let's talk about a variety of collectibles, and we'll talk about, at least in my opinion, what may be the best options within that given format. So this first one that we're going to talk about is a big one, and I mean that both in terms of price tag, and I also mean that in terms of size, and that is the XM Studios Darth Maul quarter scale statue. XM Studios are a Singapore-based producer of statues and display pieces. Almost all of their pieces have extremely small, limited runs, and their work and brands like DC and Transformers has gotten them a lot of attention from collectors. This Darth Maul statue is 1/4 scale, measuring 28 inches tall and weighs a whopping 30 pounds. Don't put it on a detail shelf. It won't fit, it'll look silly, and it'll break the glass. It depicts Maul leaping off his blood-finned speeder in the Tatooine desert, saber-bared to attack Qui-Gon. Like most XM pieces, it's not a direct screen grab match to the film, but an interpretation. It tries to bring Maul's purpose to the forefront, making something dynamic. It is, however, painstakingly accurate to the smallest detail and doesn't do any artistic reinterpretations of the designs from the movie. Retailed for 1,099 Singapore dollars, only 270 were made, meaning tracking this thing down is going to get expensive. But as XM say on their website, highly valued in limited availability, XM pieces appeal only to the most determined, discerning collectors. After all, nothing worth having comes easy. That's their quote. So let me give my thoughts on this. I think this is the best quarter scale representation of Maul. There aren't many to choose from, so the competition is limited in that regard. However, I love the pose. It has movement to it. It is, as previously mentioned, dynamic. However, I'm not sure if it's something that I want to buy for my personal collection, only because I'm not treating quarter scale anywhere near a completionist perspective. My quarter scale stuff is going to be different in its approach. But if I was looking for a quarter scale piece of Maul specifically, this would probably be the one that I went after. It is beautiful. XM makes great work, great pieces. It is the creme de la creme. Let's move on to something smaller, but not too small, so to speak. The Gentle Giant statue. Gentle Giant produces statues and busts in a variety of sizes and scales. In particular, they have become known for their Star Wars mini busts and maquettes, bookends, and even quarter scale Kenner figures, which are super awesome. Definitely a novelty thing. You definitely are getting it for a different reason other than aesthetics, but it's certainly a cool line to think about. Gentle Giant have been using 3D scanning technology for years and were hired to do this for actors and props for Attack of the Clones. This led to them getting the Star Wars license and putting out their first Star Wars products in 2002. Over the years, they produced many Darth Maul statues, but I'm going to single one out. Darth Maul with the Mecha legs. It's a 1/8 scale statue depicting Maul as he first appeared in Season 4 of the Clone Wars, insane and cobbled together from scrap into a spider-like form. This piece was exclusive to Star Wars Celebration 2019, although a very limited number were also available at that year's SDCC. The price was $200, which is not a huge price for what this thing is. A larger version was released several years prior, but that's not the one we're focusing on here. This piece is beautiful. It's a realistic interpretation of animated Maul and manages to recapture the animated designs while matching the likeness of Ray Park and real-world stylings of the rest of the line. It is an interesting thing to talk about regarding Star Wars and merchandise in terms of the Clone Wars specifically, but also Rebels, comic book artists, and video game representations. To take something that is animated in its origins and redesign it, reinterpret it into a more realistic look and approach for something of a different purpose, meaning taking this animated, very stylistic look of Darth Maul in the Clone Wars as the spider monster and reimagining it for the sake of a realistic look for a statue. Now, we've seen Star Wars do this many times before, both in terms of the Clone Wars with a 3 3/4 Ahsoka, which was a fantastic representation, as well as what they've done with their Star Wars Black Series Rebels line, taking animated figures with exaggerated features and making it seem as though it exists in a real world. It's always interesting to see, and this thing with all of the legs and mechanical pieces, the pose of the upper body, etc., is going to be a strong representation of this character in this format of this time period for your collection. Moving on, this next piece is a historic one, both I think for the line and for me personally, as it changed the way that I saw figures within this scale, and that is the SH Figuarts Darth Maul. This was the first SH Figuarts piece I went in on, and it changed the trajectory of how I see 112 collecting. Don't get me wrong, you guys know I'm an adamant fan of the Black Series. I think they're making tremendous leaps and bounds, but what Figuarts taught me was the elegance that a 112 scale figure can have, and in this scenario, definitely did. This was a next to impossible piece to track down on the secondary market, and if you did, you had to pay a late tax that was formidable. The last few years, Bandai have made a big name for themselves with their SH Figuarts line. It aims to bring the art to action figures. Their figures are in the 112 scale, although typically run a little smaller than their American counterparts like Black Series. This is because they're staying truer to an actual 112 scale, as opposed to the more American toy lines, which are more of a heroic, larger-than-life representation within that scale. One of the line's earlier releases was Darth Maul, and he represents everything that makes the line successful. Beautiful sculpting, an excellent likeness, fluid, smooth articulation, with a massive range, multiple hands, a standard head, and a growling one. He's only slightly shorter than the Black Series one, meaning he should look just fine in a Black Series display. And I can tell you, from my personal perspective, which consists mainly of Black Series within the 112 line, he certainly does. SH Figuarts have also done Padawan, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon, so between the three, you can get a great display going. He's not perfect, he's missing his cloak, and sometimes the swappable hands can be frustrating, although I'd rather have that option than not have it at all. But he's still one of my favorite representations in a 1/12 scale, and is also a pivotal piece for me in the way that I regard SH Figuarts in comparison to its Western competitors. Moving on, the Hot Toys Deluxe Edition of Darth Maul, or the standard one such as I bought, but the deluxe version is really the one that's going to stand out. Hot Toys is a Hong Kong-based company producing mainly 1/6 scale collectibles. But since you're watching this, you may not even need the introduction. Since 2014, they've really made their Star Wars license into a consistent line, and Maul is one of their first prequel figures within the series. Releasing in 2019, Maul came in 2 editions, the standard and deluxe with the Sith Speeder. As the Sideshow website says, he includes 2 interchangeable head sculpts with incredible likeness, meticulously tailored outfit and robe, Darth Maul's iconic double-bladed lightsaber with LED light-up function, a Sith probe droid, a LED light-up with Sith Speeder, a range of interchangeable hands for various posing options, and a specially designed figure base. Normally, reading a bio that's trying to sell you something isn't entirely accurate or appropriate, but in this case, it pretty much is. This figure is stunning, the likeness is there, the tailoring is there, the accessories are there, and between the Sith Speeder and dynamic posing stand, you have the option of a more stoic, realistic pose or something crazy dynamic. You get the best of both worlds. A lot of times with Hot Toys, I go with a more stoic pose, and I ended up doing the same with Maul. However, I have to tell you, I'm not always sure I made the right choice because he does lend himself so well to the more dynamic poses, which for Hot Toys can be saying something. But even standing stoically without his blade ignited in my collection, he's a showstopper. People often stop and comment on him or take take special interest and look at him. That could have something to do with the character, but I think it also has to do with the representation. And you know, it wouldn't be complete if I didn't throw a 3 3/4 representation in there as well, which is why we're moving on to the Vintage Collection VC86 Darth Maul. Look, 3 3/4 isn't for everybody. It can be obnoxious. They don't have much of a presence. It's really a quantity over quality collection at the end of the day overall. And you'll spend most of your collecting life picking them up from their fallen positions. But this scale has without a doubt been the beating heart of Star Wars collecting since 1978. Beginning in 2010, Hasbro's The Vintage Collection brought super articulated, highly detailed, definitive 3 3/4-inch versions of characters from the entire saga as well as the expanded universe. 2012 saw the release of The Phantom Menace in 3D, and that meant a tie-in wave. He's excellently sculpted with a good likeness considering the scale. He's well articulated with the then new ball-hinged hips, letting him get all the kicking poses your little black Sith-beating heart desires. He includes an absolute metric ton of accessories, something this line in particular is known for. He has a lightsaber that can split in half, lightsaber hilt that can attach to his belt, fabric cloak, plastic hood, and even his binoculars. On release, this fellow was a nightmare to find, becoming one of the most scalped figures online, but he's a little easier to find loose today. And it does lend itself to the tradition of Darth Maul 3 3/4 figures. I remember when the Phantom Menace had his Midnight Madness, he was the one that was challenging to get. Between the great articulation, tons of accessories, beautiful card back and packaging, and the history of the scale, this is a truly great figure for any Maul collector. Now, the next one's a little goofy, but we're going to close out on something a little goofy. And it may seem odd at first, but hear us out. Diamond Select have been producing a line of coin banks for years now. Made of vinyl, they're lightweight and have a slot in the bottom for your loose change. They retail for about $20 to $25, and now you can have a Darth Maul that not only stores anger and hate, but your pocket change to boot. Originally released in 2014, this bank depicts Maul as he appears in his early Clone Wars episodes, shirtless with a strong EU or expanded universe influence. The sculpting and likeness on this thing is why it's here. It's pretty superb, perfectly capturing the chiseled, carved, animated look of the show. It's sculpted well, has plenty of paint, a removable lightsaber, and it looks amazing. In the collecting world, you generally get what you pay for, but this is a perfect example of how price isn't everything, and you can still produce an excellent collectible just with some solid sculpt and paint, and have something that's kind of a novelty and fun. Now, to close this out, most of you know that I'm a huge Darth Maul fan. And yes, he was thrown away in the movie, and yes, we can talk about that until the cows come home, but let's not right now. We'll save that for another day. Today, let's just talk about how many Darth Maul collectibles I have in my collection, and I want you to take a guess. I'm going to leave a minute for you to think about it while you listen to the sweet sound effects of a dolphin speaking. Not because I'm that clever or witty, but just because it's the only sound effect I have really on hand at the moment. And the answer is 9. Which isn't too terribly awful, until you consider the fact that he had like 3 lines in a movie where he died at the end. Spoilers. That being said, I hope you're staying safe, and also hope I'm helping provide a little bit of distraction from your day-to-day. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.